Family disowns daughter for getting pregnant. She builds a real estate empire. My name is Lena Walker. I am 36 years old, and I own 40 commercial properties in the state of Kansas. I employ 217 people. I have a net worth of $42 million. I have a daughter who is studying biomedical engineering at Stanford University. And my parents have not spoken to me in 17 years. This is the story of how I built everything I have, not because of my family, but in spite of them. I did not grow up poor. That is the first thing you need to understand. The Walker family had money. My grandfather, Harold Walker Sr., founded Walker Automotive, a chain of 3 car dealerships in the Wichita area. He started with a single used car lot in 1965 and built it into a business worth $20 million. He was not a billionaire, but he was comfortable. He bought a house in the College Hill neighborhood, sent my father to private school, and set up trust funds for all of his grandchildren. The expectation was that the Walkers would always be taken care of. I was the first grandchild. For the first 6 years of my life, I was the center of attention. My grandparents doted on me. My mother dressed me in matching outfits and took me to playdates. My father carried me on his shoulders through the neighborhood. There is a photo album somewhere with 100 pictures of me from ages 0 to 6. Smiling in a bathtub. Eating birthday cake. Sitting on Santa's lap. Taking my first steps. I was the proof that the Walker legacy would continue. Then James was born. I do not remember the exact moment everything changed. I just remember that suddenly, nothing I did mattered anymore. James was colicky. James needed attention. James was the boy, the one who would carry on the Walker name. My father was obsessed with him from the moment he came home from the hospital. My mother devoted every waking hour to him. And I became furniture. I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because it is true. My parents never mistreated me in the way that would get someone's attention. They did not hit me. They did not starve me. They bought me good clothes and made sure I had a roof over my head. They sent me to the same private school James would eventually attend. On paper, I had a good childhood. But I was ignored. Not in a way that would make anyone call child services. But in a way that left marks you cannot see. I remember coming home from school when I was 8 years old. I had made a clay pot in art class. It was lopsided and imperfect, but I had worked on it for 2 weeks. I painted it blue because blue was my favorite color. I carried it home on the bus, holding it carefully in my lap so it would not break. I showed it to my mother. She was feeding James, who was 2 years old at the time. She glanced at the pot and said, "That is nice, Lena. Put it on the counter." I put it on the counter. It sat there for 3 days until my father knocked it off while reaching for a coffee cup. He swept up the pieces and threw them in the trash. He did not apologize. He did not say he was sorry. He just swept it up like it was nothing, because to him, it was nothing. When I brought home an A on my report card, my mother would glance at it and say, "That is nice, Lena." When James brought home a finger painting, it went on the refrigerator for a month. When I won the 7th grade spelling bee, my father was too busy taking James to soccer practice to attend the ceremony. I stood on that stage alone, holding my trophy, looking out at an empty seat where my parents should have been. There were small things too. My mother packed my lunches, but she always forgot to include a note or a treat. She packed James's lunches with little drawings on the napkins and his favorite snacks. My father asked me about my grades but never listened to the answers. He asked James about soccer and remembered every detail. I remember when I was 10, I had a piano recital. I had been taking lessons for 2 years. I was not particularly good, but I had worked hard on my piece. It was a simple arrangement of a Bach minuet. I practiced it every day for a month. The night of the recital, my parents dropped me off at the music school and told me they would be back in an hour. They went to dinner instead. I played my piece to an audience of empty chairs where my parents should have been sitting. My piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, gave me a ride home. When I walked in the door, my parents were watching television. My father asked how it went. I said fine. He nodded and turned back to the TV. The next weekend, James had a preschool play. He was 4 years old. He played a tree in a production about the seasons. My parents were both there, sitting in the front row, recording the entire thing on a camcorder. They cheered when he stood in the right spot. I stopped taking piano lessons after that. I learned early that the only person I could count on was myself. By the time I was 14, I had figured out the pattern. James was the sun. My parents orbited around him. Everything they did was for him. His happiness was their priority. His future was their project. And I was just someone who happened to live in the same house. I started working when I was 15. My first job was at a diner called Mel's on East Douglas Avenue. I walked in off the street and asked the owner, a grizzled man named Mel Kowalski, if he was hiring. He looked me up and down and said, "You ever washed dishes?" I said, "I wash dishes at home every night." He laughed. "You are hired. For $25 an hour plus tips. Do not be late." I washed dishes and bus tables for $4.25 an hour plus tips. The tips were usually $1 or $2 a shift, split between the dishwashers and the busboys. The cooks were a bunch of grumpy old men who smoked in the back and called me kid. I loved every minute of it because it was mine. The money I earned was my money. No one could tell me what to do with it. My first paycheck was $43 for a week of work. I cashed it at the bank and put $30 into my savings account. I kept $13 for myself. I bought a used CD player from a pawn shop and a sandwich from the deli down the street. I felt like the richest person in the world. Michelle Thompson and I went to the same high school. We shared the same classes, ogled the same boys, and eventually worked together at Mel's. She was a waitress with curly brown hair and a laugh that filled the whole room. She was the first person who treated me like I mattered. We would sit in the break room after our shifts, eating the free meals the cooks made for us, and talk about our dreams. Michelle wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be a lawyer. We promised each other we would make it out of Wichita. I worked at Mel's for 2 years. I added a second job at a grocery store when I was 16, bagging groceries on weekends. By the time I was a junior, I had saved almost $3,000. I opened my own bank account at a credit union downtown. My mother was offended when she found out. She wanted me to use the joint account they had set up for me. I told her no. "You are being difficult," she said. "I am being independent," I said. I remember the look on her face. It was not anger. It was confusion. She could not understand why I would want to be separate from them. She could not understand that I had already learned the lesson she never taught me. No one was going to take care of me. I had to take care of myself. In high school, I was an excellent student. I had to be. I was working 30 hours a week, so I could not afford to fall behind. I took honors classes whenever my schedule allowed. I was on the debate team for 2 years. I wrote for the school newspaper. I did not have time for parties or football games or homecoming dances. I had to work. But I made sure my grades never slipped. Michelle and I stayed close. She would come over to my house sometimes, but I never invited her inside. I was ashamed of the cold silence that lived in my home. We would sit on the front porch instead, eating fast food and talking about our futures. "What do you think your parents would do if you just left?" she asked me once. I thought about it. I do not think they would notice for a week. She laughed, but she knew I was not joking. I graduated in the top 15% of my class. I scored well on my college entrance exams. I applied to several schools and was accepted at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. It was a good school. Not an Ivy League, but a solid university with a strong pre-law program. It was also close enough to Wichita that I could come home if I needed to, though I did not plan on coming home much. My parents paid for my tuition. They never hesitated on that. Money was never the issue with the Walkers. They wrote the check without complaint, the same way they paid for my clothes and my school supplies. It was obligation, not love. They did what was expected of them. But they never asked about my classes. They never visited Lawrence. They never called to see how I was doing. I could have been failing out of school and they would not have known until the bill stopped coming. The financial support was there. The emotional support was not. I worked 2 jobs anyway. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to be independent. I wanted money that was mine, earned by me, controlled by me. I saved every dollar I could. By the time I finished my first year, I had nearly $5,000 in my own account. It was my safety net. My proof that I did not need them. Lawrence was the first place I ever felt free. I was not Lena Walker, the invisible daughter from Wichita. I was just Lena. I made friends in my dorm. I joined a study group for my introduction to psychology class. I discovered that I was actually smart, that the grades I got in high school were not my ceiling, that I could do better when no one was telling me I was not worth the investment. I declared pre-law at the end of my first semester. I loved my classes. I loved reading cases and understanding how the law shaped society. I loved arguing with my professors and classmates. I felt alive for the first time in my life. I met Daniel during the second semester of my freshman year. He was in my introduction to political science class. We were assigned to the same discussion group. He was tall and good-looking with brown hair and an easy smile. He was from Overland Park, the son of a successful dentist and a stay-at-home mother. He was studying business and planning to take over his father's practice one day. We started talking after class one day about a reading assignment on constitutional law. He had strong opinions about the Fourth Amendment. So did I. We argued for 20 minutes outside the classroom, neither of us willing to concede. Finally, he laughed and held up his hands. "You are too stubborn to argue with," he said. "Let me buy you coffee instead." I said yes. That coffee turned into a 2-hour conversation. We talked about everything. Our families. Our plans. Our fears. He told me his father was pressuring him to go to dental school, but he was not sure he wanted to. I told him I wanted to be a lawyer so I could help people who could not help themselves. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a relationship. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. I loved Daniel. Or at least, I thought I did. He was my first real boyfriend. He was kind to me. He made me feel seen in a way I had never felt before. He told me I was beautiful and smart and capable of anything. No one had ever said those words to me. No one had ever looked at me the way he did. I fell hard and I fell completely. We spent that summer together. He stayed in Lawrence for an internship at a dental practice. I worked 2 jobs and took a summer class. We shared a small apartment near campus. It was the happiest summer of my life. Our relationship lasted a year and a half. We talked about the future constantly. He talked about dental school and opening his own practice. I talked about law school and working in public defense. We made plans to get a place together after graduation. We talked about getting married someday. We were young and stupid and full of dreams. Then I got pregnant. I found out on a Tuesday morning. I took the test in the bathroom of my off-campus apartment. I sat on the floor for an hour staring at the result. I was 19 years old. I was a sophomore in college. I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to have a baby. I called Daniel and asked him to come over. He knew something was wrong as soon as he saw my face. I told him. And for a long moment, he just stood there. Then he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I am sure." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I am going to have the baby." He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I am not ready for this." He said he was too young. He said he had plans. He said he could not be a father. He told me he was sorry and then he left. I did not see him again after that day. He dropped out of school. I heard through a mutual friend that he had moved back to Overland Park. I tried calling him. The first few times, he did not answer. The fourth time, his mother answered. Her name was Elise. I had met her once, briefly, when Daniel and I had been together for about a year. She had been polite but cold. Now she was furious. "Do not call this number again," she said. "You are nothing but a flusy. My son has a future. He is not going to throw it away because of some girl who could not control herself." I tried to say something, but she cut me off. "Leave him alone," she said. "If you know what is good for you, you will leave my son alone." She hung up. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. I never called again. I finished out the semester, but I could not concentrate. I was exhausted all the time. I was sick in the mornings. I was falling behind in my classes. I knew I could not stay. I did not have the money. I did not have the support. I did not have anything except a baby growing inside me and a future that looked nothing like what I had planned. I went home to Wichita. I will never forget that conversation. I sat my parents down in the living room of the house I grew up in. My mother was in her usual spot on the couch with a cup of tea. My father was standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed. James was at a friend's house, so it was just the three of us. I told them I was pregnant. I told them Daniel had left. My mother set down her tea and looked at me like I was a stranger. "You are no better than a streetwalker," she said. Her voice was flat. Matter of fact. Like she was stating an obvious truth. "After everything we gave you. After everything we did for you. This is how you repay us?" I tried to explain. I told her I loved Daniel. I told her I had made a mistake. I told her I was going to take responsibility and raise the baby myself. My father did not give me a chance to finish. He walked to the front door and opened it. "Get out," he said. "You are no longer welcome in this house." I said, "Dad, please. I have nowhere to go." He said, "You should have thought of that before you made your choices." I walked out the door with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and $200 in my bank account. They stopped paying my tuition the next day. I had to withdraw from KU. Everything I had worked for was gone. A week later, I received a letter from an attorney. It was a formal notice of disownment. The letter stated that I was no longer considered a member of the Walker family. I was not to contact my parents, my brother, or any other member of the immediate family. I was not to come to the family home. I was not to attend family gatherings. The letter also informed me that my trust fund, which I was supposed to receive when I turned 30, had been dissolved. The money had been transferred to my brother James. I called my grandparents, hoping they would help. My grandfather was polite but firm. He said that I had brought shame to the family name. He said that the trust fund was a privilege, not a right. He said that they had decided to give the money to James because he was the one who would carry on the Walker legacy. I hung up the phone and sat in my cheap studio apartment on the south side of Wichita. The apartment had a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a mattress on the floor. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbor's television through the wall. The bathroom had a shower that only produced lukewarm water. I sat on that mattress and cried for the first time since I had left Lawrence. I cried until I had nothing left. And then I stopped. I wiped my face. I stood up. I made a promise to myself. I was going to survive. I was going to build a life. And one day, I was going to walk into a room where my family was sitting, and they were going to see exactly what they had thrown away. Michelle showed up at my apartment that night. She had heard what happened from her mother, who knew my mother from their garden club. She brought a box of pizza and a 6-pack of soda. "Your parents are idiots," she said as she walked through the door. She looked around my studio apartment. Her eyes landed on the mattress on the floor, the hot plate, the bare walls. "Lena. It is what I can afford," I said. She set the pizza down and hugged me. She held me for a long time. "You are going to be okay," she said. "I am going to make sure of it." Michelle was the one who drove me to my prenatal appointments because I did not have a car. She was the one who sat in the waiting room, flipping through magazines, ready to drive me home afterward. She was the one who held my hand during the ultrasound when I saw Tilly for the first time, a tiny heartbeat flickering on the screen. "You are going to be a great mom," she said. I wanted to believe her. I had Tilly on a Tuesday in August. She was 6 pounds, 11 ounces. She had my eyes and a tiny tuft of brown hair. I named her Tilly because it was a strong name, and I needed her to be strong. Michelle was in the delivery room with me. She held my hand through every contraction. She cut the umbilical cord because I was too emotional to do it myself. When the nurse placed Tilly on my chest for the first time, Michelle was crying harder than I was. "She is beautiful," Michelle said. "She looks just like you." "She looks like a wrinkled potato," I said. Michelle laughed. "A beautiful wrinkled potato." The first 3 years were the hardest. I worked as a waitress during the day and a receptionist at a dental office in the evenings. I dropped Tilly off at a daycare run by a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson who charged me $50 a week. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee. I wore clothes from the thrift store. I did not have a car, so I took the bus everywhere. But Tilly never wanted for anything. She had a crib that I bought secondhand and sanded down and painted myself. She had a car seat that Michelle helped me install. She had diapers and formula and warm clothes. She had books. I read to her every night. I read Goodnight Moon so many times I could recite it from memory. I sang to her even though I could not carry a tune. I told her she was loved and wanted and that she could be anything she wanted to be. I remember one night when Tilly was about 18 months old. She had a fever. I did not have health insurance. I sat up all night with her, wiping her forehead with a cool washcloth, singing lullabies, praying she would be okay. When the sun came up, her fever had broken. I held her and cried. Tilly was smart. I knew it by the time she was 3. She could count to 100 before she started preschool. She taught herself to read when she was 4. She would sit on my lap while I was working at the kitchen table and sound out words from the newspaper. Her preschool teacher called me in for a conference. I was terrified she was in trouble. "Ms. Walker, Tilly is reading at a first-grade level," the teacher said. "She is far ahead of her peers. Have you considered testing her for gifted programs?" I sat in that tiny chair at the preschool and cried. They were happy tears. My daughter was brilliant. I had done something right. By the time Tilly was in 1st grade, she was reading chapter books. She won the school spelling bee when she was 8. She won the science fair in 4th grade with a project on solar energy. She was placed in the gifted program and thrived. Her teachers always told me she was a joy to have in class. She was curious and eager and kind. She had friends. She was happy. That was all I ever wanted for her. Michelle came to every school event with me. Spelling bees. Science fairs. Parent-teacher conferences. She sat next to me in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. When Tilly graduated from elementary school, Michelle was the one who took pictures while I cried. She is going to be a doctor, Michelle said. Or a CEO, I said. Or an astronaut. Or president. She has options. She gets it from you. I shook my head. She gets it from herself. I just made sure she had a chance. You gave her more than a chance, Lena. You gave her a foundation. You gave her an example. She watched you build an empire from nothing. That is going to shape everything she does. I thought about that. I hoped Michelle was right. She is going to be whatever she wants to be, I said. Biomedical engineering, Tilly said. I want to design prosthetics. I looked at my daughter, this brilliant, confident young girl, and I felt a pride so deep it hurt. She was everything I had hoped she would be. I worked 2 jobs for the first 5 years of Tilly's life. During the day, I waited tables at a steakhouse called The Ranch on the east side of Wichita. I worked the lunch shift from 11 to 2 and the dinner shift from 5 to 9. The tips were decent on weekends. During the week, I was lucky to make $30 in tips for a whole shift. In the evenings, I worked the front desk at a medical clinic called West Side Family Medicine on West Maple. I answered phones, scheduled appointments, filed insurance claims, and cleaned the waiting room before I left. The pay was $11 an hour. The office manager, a woman named Diane Foster, was a kind person who let me bring Tilly to work when Mrs. Patterson was sick. My schedule was relentless. I woke up at 5:30 every morning. I got Tilly ready for school, dropped her off at Mrs. Patterson's house by 7, and drove to the ranch for the lunch prep shift. I worked until 2, then drove to SmileCare for the afternoon shift. I picked Tilly up at 6, made dinner, helped with homework, got her bathed and in bed, and then stayed up until midnight doing paperwork and studying for my real estate license. I survived on coffee and determination. Michelle would call me every night to make sure I was still awake. She would bring me groceries when I was too exhausted to shop for myself. She was the only person who knew how hard I was fighting. Michelle Thompson was my lifeline during those years. We had been best friends since high school. She had gone to college at Wichita State and become a nurse. She was the one who showed up at my apartment with groceries when I was too pregnant to work. She was the one who sat with me in the hospital when Tilly was born. She was the one who let me cry on her shoulder when I thought I could not do it anymore. Lena, you are the strongest person I know, she told me one night. Tilly was asleep in the next room. We were sitting on my floor eating takeout Chinese food. You are going to make it. I believe in you. I needed to hear that. I needed someone to believe in me because I was not sure I believed in myself. When Tilly was 4, I got my first break. I was working as a receptionist at a real estate office called Thompson Commercial Properties. The owner, a man named Harold Thompson, noticed that I was always staying late, always reading the contracts and listings, always asking questions about how the business worked. You are interested in real estate, he said one day. I said, yes, sir. I want to understand how it works. He handed me a book. Read this. Then we will talk. The book was about commercial real estate investing. I read it in 2 nights. I came back with questions. He answered them. He started teaching me. He showed me how to evaluate properties, how to negotiate deals, how to calculate return on investment. I was a sponge. I absorbed everything. Harold Thompson was the closest thing I ever had to a mentor. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. He had built his business from nothing. He saw something in me. He gave me a chance. I got my real estate license when Tilly was 5. I started working for Harold as a junior agent. I made $60,000 my first year. It was more money than I had ever seen. I put every penny I could into savings. When I was 24, I bought my first commercial property. It was a small strip mall on the north side of Wichita. 3 units. One was a laundromat, one was a barber shop, and one was vacant. The price was $210,000. I walked through that strip mall a dozen times before I made an offer. I checked the roof, the foundation, the electrical panel, the plumbing. I talked to the existing tenants. I researched the neighborhood. I ran the numbers every possible way. The property was listed at $250,000. I offered $190,000. The seller countered at $220,000. I came back at $210,000. He accepted. I put down $40,000 that I had saved over 4 years. I had been setting aside money from every paycheck, every tip, every bonus. I had skipped vacations and new clothes and dinners out. I had driven the same used Honda Civic for 6 years because every dollar I saved was a dollar closer to my first deal. Harold helped me with the financing. He co-signed the loan because my credit was still recovering from the years of scraping by. I will never forget the day I signed the papers. I sat in the closing room at a big oak table. The title agent handed me a pen. I signed my name. Lena Walker. Owner. I was 24 years old. I was a single mother. I had been disowned by my family. And I owned a piece of commercial real estate. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that strip mall for 20 minutes after the closing. I did not cry. I just sat there and looked at the building and let the feeling wash over me. I had done it. I had taken the first step. Michelle took me out to dinner that night to celebrate. We went to a casual Italian place on the east side. She ordered a bottle of wine even though I could only afford to drink water. To Lena Walker, she said, raising her glass. Property owner. Empire builder. The woman who is going to make her family regret every single thing they ever did to her. I laughed. That is a long toast. You have a long story to tell. We sat there for 2 hours, talking and laughing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was going to be okay. The strip mall performed well. I found a tenant for the vacant unit. A small bakery called Sweet Magnolia moved in. The owner was a woman named Diane who baked the best cinnamon rolls in Wichita. The rent from all 3 units covered the mortgage and gave me a small profit each month. I reinvested every dollar into the property. I repaved the parking lot. I fixed the roof. I painted the storefronts. I made it better. That first property taught me something important. I learned that value is not just about location. It is about management. 2 identical buildings on the same street can perform completely differently depending on who is running them. I decided I would be the one who ran my properties well. I bought my second property 2 years later. A small office building near downtown. 2 stories, 10,000 square feet, built in 1965. The roof needed work and the HVAC system was outdated. I got it for a good price because no one else wanted to deal with the repairs. I put $30,000 into renovations and leased it out to a law firm and an accounting practice. The law firm was Wilson & Associates. The accounting firm was Miller Financial. They both signed 5-year leases. The building cash flowed from day one. But I never forgot about Daniel. And when Tilly was 7, I decided it was time to make him take responsibility. I hired a lawyer named Rebecca Torres. She was sharp and relentless. She tracked Daniel down to Overland Park, where he was working at his father's dental practice. She filed a petition for child support and paternity testing. The court date was set for a Tuesday morning in Johnson County. I took the day off work. Michelle came with me for moral support. We drove to Olathe in her old Honda Civic, listening to country music on the radio and trying to keep our nerves steady. You have got this, Michelle said as we pulled into the parking lot. He is the one who ran. You are the one who stayed. I walked into that courtroom with Tilly's birth certificate, a list of every expense I had incurred over 7 years, and a folder full of report cards and teacher evaluations showing what a wonderful child she was. I had a binder with color-coded tabs. Rebecca had helped me prepare. Daniel was there with his mother, Elise. He looked older than I remembered. He had put on weight. His face had lost the boyish quality I had fallen in love with. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. Elise was sitting next to him, dressed in expensive jewelry and a cream-colored ensemble, her arms crossed, her face set in permanent disapproval. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Patricia Holloway. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked at both sides with the same expression of patient authority. The first order of business was paternity. Daniel's lawyer, a portly man in an ill-fitting suit, argued that there was no definitive proof that Daniel was the father. He suggested that I had been with other men during my relationship with Daniel. I felt my face go hot. Rebecca put a hand on my arm. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "my client has provided a sworn affidavit stating that Daniel was her only partner during the relevant time period. She is willing to submit to a DNA test and requests that Mr. Daniel do the same." Judge Holloway nodded. "DNA testing is ordered. The results will be submitted to the court within 30 days. The next 30 days were agonizing. I went to a lab in Wichita and gave a blood sample. Daniel did the same in Overland Park. We waited. The results came back 99.99% positive. Daniel was Tilly's father. The next hearing was about financial support. Daniel's lawyer argued that he was a young man with limited income who was just starting his career. He presented tax returns showing that Daniel made $40,000 a year working at his father's dental practice. Rebecca was ready. She presented evidence that his father's dental practice had a gross revenue of $1,200,000 per year. She presented documents showing that Daniel was listed as a beneficiary on multiple trust accounts worth over $500,000. She presented bank statements showing regular deposits from his parents into his personal account. "My client is not asking for a percentage of the family wealth," Rebecca said. "She is asking that Mr. Daniel contribute a reasonable amount toward the support of his daughter. A daughter he has never met. A daughter whose existence he has spent 7 years ignoring." Elise stood up from her seat. "This is ridiculous," she said. "She is a gold digger. She got pregnant on purpose to trap my son. She has been after our money from the beginning." Judge Holloway banged her gavel. "Mrs. Elise, you will sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Elise sat down. Her face was red. Her hands were shaking. Rebecca continued. She presented the timeline. "Daniel and I had been in a relationship for 1.5 years. I had gotten pregnant. Daniel had left Lawrence within a week of finding out. I had never asked him for a dime in 7 years. I had raised Tilly alone while working multiple jobs. I had never contacted Daniel after his mother told me to leave him alone." "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "my client has raised this child entirely on her own. She has paid for every diaper, every doctor visit, every school supply. She has not asked for a handout. She has not harassed the father. She has simply come to this court to request that he fulfill his legal obligation to the child he helped create." The judge looked at Daniel. "Mr. Daniel, do you have anything to say?" Daniel stood up. He looked at me. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or guilt. Then it was gone. "I did not know she was going to keep it," he said. "She never told me she was going to keep it." I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat perfectly still and let Rebecca handle it. "Mr. Daniel, my client did not need your permission to keep her child," Rebecca said. "And you did not need a court order to be a father. You could have been involved. You could have helped. You chose not to. Judge Holloway ordered Daniel to pay $800 a month in child support plus 50% of medical expenses and 25% of educational costs. She also ordered Daniel to cover $3,000 of my legal fees. "Mr. Daniel," she said, "you are fortunate that Ms. Walker has not sought back child support for the 7 years you were absent. I suggest you consider that a gift and comply fully with this court's order." Daniel looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Elise's face turned a deep shade of purple. She opened her mouth to speak, caught the judge's eye, and closed it again. I walked out of that courtroom with a court order for child support in my hand. It was not about the money. It was about accountability. I wanted Daniel to know that he could not just walk away and pretend Tilly did not exist. I wanted Tilly to know that her father was legally responsible for her, even if he never showed up. The money helped. $800 a month was not life-changing, but it covered Tilly's after-school program and her piano lessons. It meant I could put a little more into savings. It meant I could breathe a little easier. But more than that, it meant justice. It meant that someone had finally held Daniel accountable for what he had done. Each property taught me something. I learned about zoning laws and property taxes and the importance of a good inspector. I learned that you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. I learned that the best deals are the ones no one else wants. A warehouse on the north side was my third purchase. It had been empty for 3 years. The roof leaked. The floor had cracks. The previous owner had let it fall into disrepair. I walked through it with a contractor, took notes, crunched the numbers. The acquisition cost was $300,000. The renovations would be $100,000. But the potential rent was $40,000 a year. That was a 12% return on my total investment. I bought it, fixed it, and leased it to a distribution company called Midwest Logistics for 15 years. An old strip mall in a declining part of town was my fourth. Everyone told me I was making a mistake. My own agent tried to talk me out of it. But I saw something they did not. The neighborhood was on the verge of a revival. A new hospital was being built 6 blocks away. The city had approved a new bus route. Property values were about to climb. I bought the strip mall for $250,000. 3 years later, it was worth $800,000. By the time I was 28, I owned 7 properties. I was still working full-time at Thompson Commercial, but I was spending more and more of my energy on my own portfolio. Harold noticed. "You are not going to be my employee forever," he said one day. "I know," I said. "What are you going to do when you leave?" I thought about it. "I am going to build something bigger." He smiled. "Good answer." I left Thompson Commercial when I was 29. I had 9 properties by then. I had saved enough to live on for a year without drawing a salary. I rented a small office on West Douglas and hung a sign that said Walker Commercial Real Estate. My first year on my own was terrifying. I had no steady income. Every dollar I made came from commissions and lease renewals. I worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. I cold-called property owners. I networked at every Chamber of Commerce event in Wichita. I built relationships with bankers and investors and contractors. I bought my 10th property when I was 30. It was a medical office building near the new hospital. The seller was a retired doctor who wanted to liquidate his assets. He was asking $800,000. I offered $650,000. He countered at $700,000. I said yes. That building was a turning point. It was my largest acquisition to date. It had 8 suites, all of which I leased to medical practices within 6 months. The cash flow was strong. The appreciation was steady. I refinanced it a year later and pulled out $200,000 in equity, which I used as down payments on my next 3 purchases. I bought a former bank branch that had been converted into a restaurant. I bought a small retail center anchored by a pharmacy. I bought a vacant lot zoned for commercial development. I bought an old auto shop and turned it into a storage facility. By the time I was 32, I owned 18 properties. I had a staff of 7 people. My net worth had crossed $5 million. I was no longer just a landlord. I was a real estate entrepreneur. That same year, I got a call from Harold Thompson. He was retiring. He asked me if I wanted to buy his company. I said yes. I took out a loan against my portfolio and purchased Thompson Commercial Properties. I renamed it Walker Commercial Real Estate. I kept Harold on as a consultant for the first year. He helped me transition the clients and manage the existing contracts. That was the year everything changed. I was no longer just collecting rent. I was managing a full-service commercial real estate firm. I had agents working for me. I had property managers. I had a reputation. I bought my first shopping center when I was 33. It was a 40,000 square foot center anchored by a grocery store. The grocery store had just signed a new 10-year lease. The center was $2 million. I put together a syndication with 3 investors and put in $400,000 of my own money. Not every deal was a winner. I learned that the hard way. There was an office building on the west side that I overpaid for. I had been too optimistic about the market. The building sat half empty for 2 years. The debt service ate into my reserves. I had to sell it at a loss. That deal cost me $150,000. I sat in my office after that sale and stared at the ceiling. I had made a mistake. A costly one. But I did not let it destroy me. I analyzed what went wrong. I had ignored the data because I wanted the deal to work. I had let optimism override analysis. I promised myself I would never do that again. The shopping center performed even better than I had projected. The grocery store drew traffic. The smaller retail spaces filled up quickly. Within a year, the center was fully leased and generating a 7% return. That deal gave me the confidence to think bigger. I started looking at larger properties. Hotels. Office parks. Country clubs. By the time I was 34, I owned 26 properties. My portfolio was diverse. Retail centers. Office buildings. Warehouses. Medical offices. I had learned to spread risk across different asset classes so that no single market downturn could destroy me. I had also built a strong team. My operations manager was a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, a former bank branch manager who was the most organized person I had ever met. My lead property manager was a man named Roberto Vasquez, who had been in commercial real estate for 20 years and knew every contractor and vendor in Wichita. My accountant was a quiet genius named Sarah Chin who could find money in a spreadsheet that no one else could see. I bought Walnut Hills Country Club when I was 34. I bought it because my family was there. I had known for years that my parents and James were members. They had been going there since James was in high school. It was their place. The place where the Walkers went to be seen, to network, to pretend they were better than everyone else. The club was a distressed asset when I started watching it. The previous owner, an old money family from Wichita, had mismanaged it for years. Membership had declined from 800 to 300. The restaurant was losing money. The golf course needed renovation. The whole place had a tired, faded feel. I watched Walnut Hills for 2 years. I tracked its decline. I knew every number. I knew exactly when the board would be desperate enough to sell. I waited until the right moment, then I made my offer. $4,200,000, well below the assessed value of $7 million. The board had no choice. They accepted. I did not buy it for the return on investment. I bought it because they loved it. And I wanted them to know what it felt like to lose something they loved. I hired Nathan Scott as the property manager. He was a retired hotel manager with 30 years of experience at the Ritz-Carlton in Kansas City. He knew how to run a high-end establishment better than anyone in the state. He knew how to handle difficult members. He knew how to turn a struggling property around. Nathan was in his late 50s, tall and distinguished with silver hair and a calm, unflappable demeanor. I met him for coffee at a diner near his home. I told him about the club, about my vision, about what I wanted to build. He listened carefully, asked a few questions, and then nodded. "I am in," he said. Nathan ran Walnut Hills with quiet efficiency. He overhauled the kitchen staff and brought in a new head chef. He renovated the dining room and the bar. He modernized the reservation system. He personally called every lapsed member and invited them back. Within a year, membership had increased by 40%. The restaurant had become one of the best in Wichita. The golf course was being praised in regional magazines. The club was profitable for the first time in 6 years. During those 2 years, I kept building. I added 14 more properties to my portfolio. A car wash on West Street. A self-storage facility near the airport. A small hotel that I converted into affordable housing. A strip mall in Andover. An office building in Derby. A former church that I turned into event space. Each property was a piece of a larger puzzle. I was not just buying buildings. I was building a network of assets that supported each other. By the time I was 36, I owned 40 commercial properties. My net worth was $42 million. But one property mattered more than all the others. I visited Walnut Hills once a month for board meetings. I always came in through the business entrance near the administrative offices. I parked around back, where the employees parked. I kept my ownership quiet. I waited for the right moment. On the third Thursday of September, I decided the moment had come. I came in through the main entrance. I was dressed for a business meeting. I was carrying my leather briefcase. I was walking through the lobby toward the administrative offices. I knew James would be there. He golfed every Thursday afternoon. I knew my father would be at the bar afterward. I had been watching their routines for months. And I heard a voice I had not heard in 17 years. "Lena?" I turned around. It was James. He was 30 years old. He looked like a slightly younger version of our father. He had the same broad shoulders and the same arrogant posture. He was wearing a polo shirt with the Walnut Hills logo. He was holding a putter. He looked at me like I was a trespasser. "What are you doing here?" he said. I said, "I have business here, James." He laughed. "Business? You? What kind of business could you possibly have here?" I did not answer. I did not owe him an explanation. James stepped closer. "Let me guess. You are trying to join. You think you can just walk in here and pretend you are one of us." I said, "I am not here to join." "Then what are you doing here?" His voice was getting louder. People were starting to look. "You are not welcome here, Lena. This is a private club. People like you do not belong here." My father appeared from the bar area. He was wearing a golf sweater and carrying a drink. He looked older. His hair was gray. There were lines on his face that had not been there 17 years ago. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Then it was gone. "Lena," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I am leaving," I said. "No," James said. "She is not leaving. Security is going to escort her out." My father pulled out his phone. "I am calling security," he said. "You should not be here." He called. I waited. 2 security guards arrived. They were big men in blue uniforms. They looked at me and immediately straightened up. "Ms. Walker," the lead guard said. "We did not know you were here today." My father's face went red. What did you just call her? Ms. Walker, sir. She owns the club. James laughed. That is not possible. It is, sir. Ms. Walker has owned Walnut Hills for 2 years now. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the ice clinking in my father's drink. My father turned to me. His face was red. You think you are something special? You are nothing without Walker money. You always were a disappointment. I built 40 properties without a dime of Walker money, I said. $42 million. Every penny mine. James stepped forward. You are lying. There is no way she owns this place. Nathan Scott appeared from his office, drawn by the commotion. He walked across the lobby with his measured, professional stride. Is there a problem? He asked. The security guard gestured at James. These individuals are demanding Ms. Walker be removed from the premises. Nathan looked at James, then at my father. His expression did not change. Ms. Walker is the owner of Walnut Hills Country Club. She has been for 2 years. If anyone is being removed, it will not be her. James's face went pale. That is not possible. The sale was completed on March 15th. Ms. Walker purchased the club through Walker Commercial Real Estate. She is the sole owner. James looked at me. His face was a mixture of disbelief and rage. You own this place? I said, yes, James. I own this place. I turned to Nathan. Mr. Scott, I would like to revoke the memberships of Donald Walker, Jeannie Walker, and James Walker. Effective immediately. Nathan nodded. Of course, Ms. Walker. You cannot do this, James said. We have been members here for 15 years. I looked at him. I can do this. I own this club. And I am exercising my right as the owner to determine who is and is not a member. My father said, Lena, please. Let us talk about this. I said, you have no idea what I built. 17 years ago, you kicked me out of your house with $200 and a duffel bag. You sent a letter telling me I was no longer part of the family. My grandparents dissolved my trust fund and gave it to James. I was 19 years old and pregnant and alone. And none of you cared. That was different, he said. It was not different. It was exactly the same as this. You decided that I did not belong. And now I am deciding that you do not belong. I looked at the security guards. Please escort these individuals off the premises. They did not resist. My father walked out with his head down. James was muttering under his breath. I watched them go. Nathan Scott stood beside me. Will that be all, Ms. Walker? I said, yes, Mr. Scott. Thank you. I walked out of the lobby and into the parking lot. The sun was setting over the golf course. The sky was orange and gold. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. My phone buzzed. It was Michelle. How did the meeting go? She asked. Interesting, I said. Define interesting. I saw my family. There was a pause. Are you okay? I thought about it. I thought about the look on my father's face when he realized I owned the club. I thought about James's rage. I thought about the years of being ignored, the years of struggle, the years of building something from nothing. I am fine, I said. I am better than fine. Michelle laughed. That is my girl. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow? I asked. I want to tell you the whole story. Are you kidding? I would not miss it. Same place as always? Same place. We had been meeting at the same coffee shop on Douglas Avenue for 15 years. Through every job change, every property deal, every heartbreak. Michelle had been there for all of it. She was the sister I never had. She was the family I chose. I drove home to the house I had bought 3 years ago. It was a 4-bedroom craftsman in the Riverside neighborhood with a wraparound porch and a backyard big enough for a garden. It was the kind of house I had dreamed about when I was living in that studio apartment with a hot plate and a mattress on the floor. It had hardwood floors and original woodwork and a fireplace in the living room. I had paid cash for it. Tilly was home for the weekend. She was a freshman at Stanford, home for a visit. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when I walked in. Her laptop was open. Her textbooks were spread out around her. She had a cup of tea and a half-eaten apple. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, Mom. How was your day?" I kissed the top of her head. "It was a good day, sweetheart. A really good day." She studied my face. She had always been able to read me. "What happened?" I sat down across from her. "I saw your grandfather today." Her smile faded. She knew the story. I had told her everything when she was old enough to understand. I had not hidden the truth from her. She deserved to know where she came from and what her mother had overcome. I had told her about the trust fund and the attorney letter and the years of struggle. I had told her about Daniel and Elise and the court case. She knew everything. "How did that go?" she asked. "He is no longer a member at the country club I own." Tilly laughed. It was a bright, genuine laugh that filled the kitchen. "You did not." "I did." "That is amazing." I wish I could have seen his face. It was satisfying. "Your grandfather looked like he had swallowed his own tongue." She laughed again. "Mom, you are my hero." I felt my chest tighten. "I am just doing what I have to do." "No," she said. "You are doing what no one else could do. You built everything from nothing. You raised me alone. You fought for us. And now you own the country club where your family tried to pretend you did not exist. That is not just doing what you have to do. That is legendary." I did not know what to say. So I just sat there and let her words wash over me. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I am proud of you, Mom. You know that, right?" I felt the tears coming. I blinked them back. "I am proud of you too, Tilly. More than you will ever know." She was at Stanford on a full academic scholarship, already working in a research lab that was developing prosthetic limbs. She was going to change the world. And I had made that possible. Not my parents. Not Daniel. Me. We sat there for a while, holding hands across a kitchen table. The house was warm and quiet. The sun was setting outside the window. It was the most peaceful moment I had experienced in years. That night, I sat on my porch and looked at the stars. I thought about the 19-year-old girl who had been kicked out of her home with nothing but a duffel bag. I thought about the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments when I thought I could not go on. And I thought about my family. The Walkers. The people who had decided that I was not worth their time. I did not hate them anymore. That was the strange thing. For years, I had carried that anger like a weight. But tonight, sitting on my porch with the cool September air on my face, I realized that the weight was gone. They had not broken me. They had not stopped me. They had not defined me. I was Lena Walker. I was 36 years old. I owned 40 commercial properties. I employed 217 people. I had a daughter who was going to change the world. And I had built it all myself. I walked inside and closed the door. The house was warm and quiet. Tilly had gone to bed. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I thought about calling my brother. I thought about sending my parents a letter. I thought about driving to their house and knocking on their door and asking them if they were proud of me now. But in the end, I did none of those things. Because I did not need their validation anymore. I had spent too many years wanting them to see me, to acknowledge me, to love me the way they loved James. And I had finally realized that they were incapable of it. It was not a flaw in me. It was a flaw in them. I thought about my grandfather, who had dissolved my trust fund. He had died 5 years ago. I had not attended the funeral. I had not been invited. I heard that my brother James gave the eulogy. I heard that he talked about carrying on the Walker legacy. I wondered what he had done to deserve that legacy. He was 30 years old and had never held a real job. He lived off the trust fund that should have been mine. He managed one of my grandfather's car dealerships and was running it into the ground. But he was the son. He was the one who mattered. I thought about Elise, who had called me a floozy on the phone. She had sent me a letter once, years after the court case, asking if I would agree to lower the child support payments. I had written back one sentence. No. I thought about Daniel, who had never met his daughter. He had never seen her win a spelling bee or perform in a school play or get her acceptance letter to Stanford. He did not know what he was missing. And that was his loss, not ours. I thought about my mother, who had told me I was no better than a streetwalker. She was still a member at Walnut Hills. Or rather, she had been until today. I thought about my father, who had kicked me out of the house with nothing. He had called security on me at my own property. And I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No regret. Just a quiet, steady peace. James called me 3 weeks later. I let it go to voicemail. Lena, it is me. The bank is taking the dealership. Dad is sick. Mom has not left the house since the club. I do not know what else to do. I thought maybe you could help. I deleted the message. The bank took the dealership a week later. My father lost everything. I bought the property at auction for 1/3 of what it was worth. I leased it to a competing dealership within 6 months. The Walkers had built their legacy on that lot. Now it was mine. My mother came to see me the day after the auction. She showed up at my office unannounced. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. The expensive clothes were gone. She was wearing a plain dress that did not fit her well. I know you bought the dealership, she said. I did. She stood in the doorway of my office, gripping her purse with both hands. Your father is destroyed. James cannot get out of bed. And you are sitting here in your nice office like nothing happened. Nothing did happen. Not to me. Her face twisted. You are still angry after all these years. I am not angry, Mom. I am telling you what I should have said a long time ago. Do you remember the clay pot I made in art class when I was 8? I painted it blue. You glanced at it and went back to feeding James. Dad knocked it off the counter 3 days later and swept it into the trash like it was nothing. She said nothing. Do you remember my piano recital? You dropped me off and went to dinner. I played to an empty room. Mrs. Chen had to drive me home. Lena. Do you remember the 7th grade spelling bee? Dad was too busy taking James to soccer practice. I stood on that stage alone holding my trophy. You never even asked to see it. Her eyes were wet. I did not care. You had a daughter who would have done anything for your attention. And you gave her nothing. So do not come to my office and tell me I am angry. I am not angry. I am done. She waited. Maybe she expected me to offer something. Money. Forgiveness. A way back in. I said nothing. She turned and walked out without another word. It was the last time I ever saw her. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. I just continued building. That was the worst punishment I could give them. I did not need to destroy them. I just needed to succeed without them. The Walker family had spent 17 years pretending I did not exist. And now I had returned the favor. But here is the thing about being invisible. When no one is watching you, no one sees you coming. I built an empire while they were not looking. I raised a daughter while they were not paying attention. I became someone while they were busy pretending I was no one. And it was beautiful. I am Lena Walker. I am 36 years old. I own 40 commercial properties in the state of Kansas. I employ 217 people. I have a net worth of $42 million. I have a daughter who is going to change the world. And I did it all myself. That is not a sad story. That is not a tragedy. That is the story of a girl who was told she was nothing and decided to become everything. The Walker family wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became unforgettable.